Last week, the day of the launch day of Saints Row, August the 23rd.
Sir, with all due respect, I really think it's time we just do what the fans want.
You know what? I agree with you.
Really, sir?
Absolutely. No more BS. It's time. It's time to reboot Saints Row.
Oh, sir, after all these years, I'm so happy to hear you finally say that. How should we do it?
How about this? Imagine playing as a college student.
Well, what?
In the middle of a desert.
Oh, no, sir, no.
And they start a gang to pay off their student loans, and they go around playing chess.
Oh my God.
Taking selfies.
We are so screwed.
And all that good stuff.
Saints Row itself has had a hell of an identity crisis across the 2000s, the 2010s, and it's kind of resulted in two different identities that you can point to and go, I like that era of Saints Row, and I don't like that era, i.e. the early games were a lot more like GTA, they were a lot more grounded, especially Saints Row 1, and about half-ish, let's say, of Saints Row 2, before Saints 3 and 4, and especially Get Out of Hell, just went as ridiculous as possible and as over-the-top as possible. That meant that you had entire swaths of the fandom just say, look, this isn't for me, and I'm okay. And Get Out of Hell and Saints 4, as far as I know, didn't sell as well as Saints 3. Now, Saints 3 is my personal favorite, even though I've been with the franchise since the beginning, and I think it's worth mentioning all of this because you've still got members of the same dev team going back to the IP in 2022 after numerous delays and quite a lengthy development period to try and make the IP work again in 2022 for a whole new audience. Now, a lot of people, when they first saw the reveal trailer for this, just felt quite cringed out by the way the characters were written and the general tone. It was very post-MCU, very quippy. Every single character is taking every part of the scenario they're in super lightly, and it was that whole thing of, is this game going to just be another throwaway, Forspoken trailer-style quip fest where nothing really lands? Sadly, yes, that's entirely what this is.
For some people, it was considered a blatant copycat to the ever-popular franchise Grand Theft Auto, while to others, it was just another open-world crime game with its own style, humor, and twists. Saints Row was one of my favorite games back in that era. It took the whole gang rap culture with Street Wars and put it into a video game, and it was well executed. Saints Row was charming and different enough that I didn't consider it to be a competitor to GTA, but rather a title that stood on its own two legs and built its own audience. Fast forward many years and the franchise spawned multiple sequels that got worse and worse with each iteration, and now Volition decided to rebrand the series with a new generation and veteran fans. I hate to say this, but the short answer is that this game is an insult not only to the original fan base, but to the whole gaming crowd, and here is why. Welcome to a review of Saints Row. As all of you know, gameplay is the most important aspect of any video game. We mentioned this in previous reviews and it won't be any different here. The gameplay in Saints Row is, simply put, awful, and barely has any redeeming qualities. First and foremost, let's talk about the storyline, characters, how everything is set up, and what to expect out of this so-called reboot. There are four main characters in Saints Row: yourself, Eli, Kevin, and Nina. They're college kids trying to make money by working with a variety of gangs such as the Idols, Los Panteros, and the Marshals. You start the game by creating your character who is the boss of your gang and doing some errands for the Marshals to prove yourself so you can make enough income to pay your rent. Saints Row doesn't have a default protagonist. Instead, the player has the freedom to create a boss they want for their gang using the fancy character creator. I will give credit where credit is due. Volition created an extensive character creator that gives a ton of freedom to the user on how they want their character to look. You can change every detail of the face with a bunch of sliders, have prosthetics for your arms or legs, and have goofy outfits and silly faces. There is so much detail that you can easily spend hours in the character creator alone. Additionally, throughout the game world, you can unlock a ton of clothing and get even crazier with your custom looks, and that's always a plus in my book. However, a good character creator doesn't mean the game is actually good itself, nor does it mean the gameplay is satisfying. For the most part, the three main characters of your gang are not terrible, but they're not great either. It's more of a subjective matter of whether you'll enjoy the cast or not. These types of missions are not enough to save Saints Row from its awful core gameplay systems. With how obnoxiously bad the animations are, mixed in with the atrocious gunplay and a lack of variety of enemies, there's not much to enjoy here. It's a game that everyone has already played, and those games are likely in a better state. It will take you upwards of 30 to 50 hours to 100% the entire city if you are willing to torture yourself. But what about the multiplayer? There is no competitive or any kind of PvP multiplayer in the reboot of Saints Row. You can only play co-op with a friend. This is also another disappointment because the multiplayer modes in the original Saints Row, such as Protect the Pimp, were fun as hell.
Your health bar is divided into separate chunks. Your health will automatically recharge if you don't sustain damage for a few seconds, but it will only refill to the nearest checkpoint, whether that's 1/3 of your health, 2/3 of your health, and so on. To get more health back, you need to kill enemies by getting up close and performing a stylish execution. You can only use these cinematic takedowns once before the ability needs to charge, but kills recharge the meter much more quickly, so you're encouraged to create mayhem in order to better heal yourself. There's no cover system, only a roll that can help you avoid fire, so combat is all about staying on the front foot and being aggressive to survive. It's at its best when things are frantic and you're overwhelmed by enemies converging on you from all sides. This happens more often on higher difficulties, but the checkpoints in campaign missions are so forgiving that the trade-off doesn't seem worth it. When not shooting people, most of your time is spent behind the wheel of various vehicles. Driving in Saints Row feels overly floaty, but this was never a hindrance to my enjoyment of cruising around the city. There's a dedicated drift button that lets you swerve around corners with ease, and the addition of a sideswipe attack makes vehicular combat more exciting.
Well, my characters were just talking about, hey, let's go do this, and then we can get home and do karaoke, and I'm like, who are these people? I've never met a single person that in their circumstance would be talking like this. As I record this, I realized that I ended up becoming negative again. I was trying to cover some positive stuff. It is fun enough to shoot some dudes. The main positive here is that the character creator from the other games is still back. That idea of Saints Row having one of the best character creators in gaming is still here. I'm reliably informed by my female friends that a lot of the fashion choices here do feel notably outdated. I wouldn't know, man in a wrestling shirt.
But I also ran into a few more serious issues. During one mission, the scripting failed and left me trapped with no door to go through, while restarting the nearest checkpoint caused the game to crash. There was another instance where a vehicle I had to destroy was indestructible, and a few other cases where a mission wouldn't progress. Saints Row reigns in the absurdity to a fairly significant degree, but still manages to indulge in some of the chaotic action and silly hijinks the series is known for. Its story is simple and fairly predictable, yet spending time with its diverse and well-rounded characters makes it worth seeing through to the end. It's a shame the gameplay isn't quite as progressive, opting instead for out-of-date mechanics and level design. Combat is decent and story missions are enjoyable when at their most over the top, but there's too much bland filler between. Rebooting the series made sense, yet in many ways Saints Row is still stuck in the past and struggling to live up to its legacy.
In conclusion, I feel sorry for the people working on this game. I feel sorry for the Saints Row fandom. I'm part of it. I've grown up with this entire franchise. I remember it right from back at the beginning. And like I said, I would just recommend you go back and play those games. You know, Saints 1, Saints 2. Saints 2 has a massive following, and I, for one, love Saints 3. I just think that if you want some Saints Row, you are better off playing Saints Row 3 Remastered or Saints Row 2 on something like the Xbox backwards compatibility, where that game has a better frame rate and auto HDR, etc. What Saints Row's 2022 version brings to the table is very, very little, unless you connect with the way the characters are written, and you just can kind of have fun with just how over the top and ridiculous everything is, where nothing really makes sense, and the game is just saving you stuff up, but not in a way that feels like there was an overall purpose to it. It just kind of feels like it's torn between various identities. Saints Row's, twin identities in itself, also trying to appeal to a youth demographic, trying to bring in the MCU-style wider comedy stuff that the likes of Forspoken have tried and failed at, and overall, it's just a bit of a mess. You can push buttons and shoot dudes, and that's satisfying enough, but at some point, it's just not enough to justify the price tag. So I didn't have that much fun with this, to be honest. And if we're going star ratings, I'm going to give it 2. I just, like I said, you can kind of have fun with it, but I just think overall it's a bit of a failure in regards to reviving Saints Row.